So welcome to Scanner School. This is session number 87. My name is Phil Lichtenberger. My mature call sign is W2LAE. And this podcast is here to teach you everything you need to know about the scanner radio hobby. Now, this session of Scanner School is sponsored by East Coast Pagers. And yes, East Coast Pagers is one of my many online companies. Now, I want to let you know about a promotion that I haven't let you know about yet. This is a promo by Swissphone. Now, if you trade in any working pager, that's anything, any pager under the sun, basically, as long as it works, it includes a desktop charger. That's a $50 trade-in credit to a Swissphone 360 or Swissphone S Quad voice. So all you got to do to qualify this is let me know you have a trade-in. Again, any working pager will qualify you for a trade-in as long as it comes with a desktop charger, and it's $50 off your brand new Swissphone S Quad 360 or S Quad voice pager. Again, you can contact me at phil@eastcoastpagers.com.
Welcome to The Scanner School, a podcast dedicated to the scanner radio hobby. Class is about to begin. Here is your host, Phil Lichtenberger.
So again, welcome back to Scanner School. My name is Phil Lichtenberger, and this podcast is always here to help you learn more about the scanner radio hobby, which is exactly what we're going to do today. We have a great interview lined up. Before we do that, though, I want to just let you know I've been going live on Facebook the last couple of days, and if you haven't been watching that or haven't been a part of that, you can join our Facebook group by going to scannerschool.com/Facebook group. And in there, I've been kind of teasing the future podcast episodes, let you guys know what's coming down the pike. Also, to let you know that the Facebook Q&A sessions are coming back for the first Saturdays at this point, the first Saturdays of each month. It looks like will be the planned date on those. We're going to do those also on YouTube as well. So I know some people don't like Facebook, and I am looking at ways to get around that because I want to make sure everybody here is included as far as the community goes. And speaking of community, I want to know what you guys want to be called. We had different things brought up over on the Facebook group. The Scanner School students, Scanner School classroom, Scanner School classmates, Lockout group, Lockout kids. We had Scanner Freaks, which I kind of like, but again, too, I don't want to call anybody a freak and then have them get annoyed at me. So there's a lot of different things out there. So I want to know also what you think. So if you want to just email me, phil@scannerschool.com. Just let me know, even in the subject line, just let me know what you think would be a good suggestion to call the community, because I would like to address you guys as well. I am really leaning towards a Scanner School student because I have something coming really soon when we hit around episode number 100, which is going to be November, and the Scanner School students are really going to tie in nicely with that. But again, too, this is why I'm asking the questions now so I can plan ahead. So right now we've got a great interview with Ben Hilburn. Now, I've already introduced Ben through the interview process, so instead of duplicating that and saying things twice, I'm just going to push you off right now into the interview. So with that, I'll catch you up on the other side. Okay, I want to welcome Ben Hilburn to the podcast today. Now, Ben is the project lead of GNU Radio. And if you're not familiar with GNU Radio, you will be by the end of this episode, and you may be surprised on how much GNU Radio has in some of the software that's out there today, and just how important this project is. So, Ben, thank you very much for being part of Scanner School today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to chat through this.
So before we get started on what GNU Radio is and all the stuff that you do with it, why don't you take a moment and explain or tell us who you are and how you got started with the radio hobby?
Oh, sure. I actually kind of fell into software radio. I was a computer engineer in school, and I was looking for work while I was an undergrad, and by pure chance, I stumbled across a software sort of development technician, assistant. It was a very junior role that was being offered by a research lab at my university, Virginia Tech, and that was what I was into. And so I went in and interviewed for the position and got it, not really paying much attention, frankly, to what it was that the research lab did. And as it turns out, it was a wireless research lab. And I discovered that, this is actually really, really cool, and I really like everything going on around me. So I sort of took my computer engineering coursework and turned it towards some of the more double E-ish topics, and got into radio, and then continued on in grad school working directly on software radio. And that's really where I first got introduced to, or first really started working on GNU Radio and working directly on software radio development. And then from there, I built my career in the field.
Excellent. So it sounds pretty interesting how you just stumbled upon this and turned a hobby into a project, and more of a passion project, and sounds like as a career as well. So let's talk about GNU Radio. We're saying that right. It's GNU Radio.
You
Correct.
are, yes. GNU Radio. Yeah.
Sometimes you don't know if the G is silent or not. But so let's talk about what GNU Radio is, and on a very basic level, let's talk about first what it is, and then what it is that you do with GNU Radio. What makes you the project lead for this piece of software?
Sure. Yeah. So GNU Radio is our sort of elevator pitch line is GNU Radio is a toolkit for building software radio applications. Now, if you're deeply familiar with software radio, you realize that just kind of skims the surface of what it is GNU Radio does. So diving into a bit more detail, GNU Radio provides a set of tools, so like design tools and software instrumentation. It provides blocks for interfacing directly with hardware. For the most part, software radios, although there are some other things like test instrumentation, like benchtop instrumentation. A library of blocks for processing. Some of these are as simple as an add block, for example. Something that's medium-ish complexity might be like a noise generator. And then we have things all the way up to like polyphase filter bank blocks. And then finally, what is known in the GNU Radio parlance as the scheduler. Probably the more layman term for it is the runtime. So in order to, if you imagine using what we call GRC, the GNU Radio Companion, which is our design tool where you connect a bunch of blocks in a flow graph that describes a radio application, there has to be something that is behind the scenes saying, okay, I understand what it means for block A to be connected to block B, and I understand how to move data off of this hardware device and into this processing block. And so that's what the runtime does. And at a high level, that is what GNU Radio gives you. So if you're talking about the GNU Radio as the GNU Radio software distribution, it is that collection of software. These days, there's a lot more going on under the GNU Radio umbrella. We have a number of other sub-projects, specification standards efforts. There's all kinds of research and undergraduate and graduate curriculum development. And there's a lot of going on under the GNU Radio umbrella, which we at that point would think of more of like an ecosystem or community. So that's kind of two sides to that. There's the GNU Radio project itself, and then the community and everything happening within it. And then in terms of my role, so I am the project lead, and there's kind of two main parts of that. There's a smaller part of that, and then the real part of it. So the small part of it is GNU Radio, as indicated by the name, is part of what's known as the larger GNU project. So the GNU project is run by the Free Software Foundation. It's an umbrella organization that runs many, many different free software projects. Pretty much every computing device that you use is using GNU software in it. And so every GNU project has a single primary maintainer who is responsible for shepherding that project and running it on behalf of GNU, and that is me. Now, realistically, there are some projects that are very, very tied into the Free Software Foundation. Everything they do is part of the larger GNU effort. GNU Radio is that's not so much the case. We operate almost entirely independently in terms of project direction and what we choose to do. And so really most of my job as project lead is making it possible for our worldwide developer and user bases to continue working on the project, to get done what they want to get done, to be able to make use of it, find resources and make them available to the community. It's really about, we have an incredible community of people who are all doing amazing things, and it's mostly about making it possible for them to keep doing that.
Okay, so you talk about it's a whole community event, so it's not a commercial establishment. It's you're kind of overseeing a bunch of volunteers and a bunch of people who are contributing, right, to the GNU project.
Yeah, that's a really good distinction. I kind of it's probably assumed too much there, that we are a large open source project. So, and I guess even that assumes too much. There's some open source projects that are backed by very large commercial company, like TensorFlow, for example, right? TensorFlow is a Google open source project. Most of the people who are developing TensorFlow are salaried Google engineers. It's run by Google, the company. It's open source in that it uses an open source software license so that anyone can go and use it. But the people working on it are paid to work on it. That is generally not the case with GNU Radio. GNU Radio is a true community-driven project, and we rely almost entirely on donated and volunteer time. And by donated time, I mean, in some cases, employers who use GNU Radio very heavily are willing to donate a small portion of their employees' time to work on GNU Radio. But they do that sort of at the behest of the community and community direction. There is no one company or one entity that decides what GNU Radio is or where it goes. We are a community-driven software distribution.
Right, and because of that too, I mean, the people aren't getting paid to actually contribute either, right? It's all 100% pretty much volunteer.
Yeah, that's right. Now there are there's some hand waviness there. So there's a number of companies, for example, where they hire people specifically because of their GNU Radio expertise.
Okay.
And so, they are GNU Radio developers within the company, for example. But their job description is, you will develop GNU Radio for the company's interests. That's different from you will develop to make contributions to GNU Radio, right? So there's kind of this difference between being a consumer of GNU Radio and creating contributions that we call, when you push it back to the project, we call it upstreaming, creating contributions that you then upstream back to the project, which is heavily volunteer time.
Gotcha. So now if, say, somebody wanted to try out GNU Radio, what would they need to do on their end? So, I mean, obviously, I'm kind of leading you to this one. I know it's several operating systems can be picked from here, and maybe you want to talk about a couple of different ones here and which one you would prefer, and how easy is it to get started with GNU Radio and just at least get it loaded onto your computer, and this way you got a blank workspace.
Yeah, so there are a lot. You kind of alluded to it. There's a lot of options.
Yes.
I will say that the only canonically supported operating system are Linux-based operating systems. Okay. Windows is supported with third-party installers that are created by a volunteer, and for the most part, they work pretty well. Jeff does actually a really fantastic job, but they are not canonically supported by the project. Mac OS support, for the most part, actually is pretty solid. One of the GNU Radio core devs is an ardent Mac user, and he maintains Mac ports for GNU Radio. Okay. And so, if you're on OS X and you're a Mac port user, you should be able to port install or, whatever the relevant command is GNU Radio. And for the most part, that seems to just work for Mac users. Linux users, on the other hand, have a lot of more options. So I'm going to go, if you're want to dive in as deeply as possible and become a GNU Radio developer, and this is what all the developers do because we're working directly with the source code, we build everything from source ourselves. It's an open source project, so you can go and grab the source code from GitHub, download it, compile it, install it, do all of that manually. If you're just consuming GNU Radio, there's no real reason for you to go through that process. And GNU Radio is actually packaged by almost every major Linux distribution at this point. So if you're using Ubuntu, which is by far and away the most widespread operating system within the GNU Radio community, and probably actually within the Linux community more broadly, right? There are official packages. So on Ubuntu, you can apt-get install GNU Radio, and it will just work. The maintainer of those Debian and Ubuntu packages is Maitland Bottoms, who is a core contributor for GNU Radio, and that's part of what he contributes to the project. There's also packages for Red Hat and Fedora and Arch Linux and several others. So for the most part, if you're on a fairly mainstream Linux distribution, you should be able to install it through your package manager and just go. If you're hoping to dive into the source code, you have a few more steps, but the source code is easily available.
Okay, sounds very good. Now, because you hit everything basically I was looking for there one. So basically, Windows isn't recommended because I guess it's a little bit complex with the packaging.
Yeah, and I should say that Microsoft is putting a lot of resources behind the Windows subsystem for Linux, and supposedly we'll be shipping actually full Linux kernels and future distributions.
It's amazing,
of
right?
Windows. Yeah, so we're keeping a close eye on that. And we've already seen a couple people in the community who've actually stood GNU Radio up and are running it on Windows through WSL. There are aspects of it that aren't fully supported yet, especially some of the graphical things that we do. And hardware gets tricky there because a lot of hardware vendors who are building software radios or test-bench instrumentation don't provide Windows driver interfaces. So there are still some limitations, but we're kind of excited about WSL and that it might give us a foot in the door to Windows.
Okay. So I mean, I'm a Mac user, almost now primarily. I mean, I kind of started ditching the Windows as much as I can, minus the radio stuff. So it's good to hear that it does work on the Mac, and I am very, very. I wouldn't say super knowledgeable where I'm dangerous, but I have the ability to play around with Linux to be able to compile stuff and all that. So you hit that one on what I was looking for too, with what type of flavor or distribution of Linux would work. One question I have here, though, is Raspberry Pi. Is there enough horsepower in a Raspberry Pi, or have you guys run this on Raspberry Pis at all?
Yeah, actually, that's a really cool question. So GNU Radio has been running on Raspberry Pis for a long time, since Raspberry Pi 1.
Okay, wow.
And so one of I sort of mentioned earlier on that, GNU Radio, as an umbrella, has some sub-projects within it that are an important part of GNU Radio, but not within GNU Radio, within the GNU Radio software distribution. One of those is a project called Volk. It's VOLK. It's libvolk.org, and that stands for Vector Optimized Library of Kernels. And so in order to run signal processing intensive applications like those that you would create with GNU Radio on systems like the Raspberry Pi, this is kind of what you're alluding to, you kind of have to do some special stuff. You have to make heavy use of what's known as SIMD operations, single instruction multiple data, the simplest description of this is, if you imagine taking an entire vector and doing the same mathematical operation on every index of that vector simultaneously. So instead of sort of saying, okay, index 0, add a value, index 1, add a value, index 2, add a value, right? You take the entire vector, you do it all at once. That's SIMD. And so that is critical in signal processing applications. So most cell phones now, for example, have what's known, the architecture is a little bit changed now, but what was known as an MPU in it, a media processing unit. And that's what, for example, decoded and encoded video on your phones. And the reason for that is because those MPUs had these SIMD operations for accelerating the computation. And so that's what Volk does. Volk is a library of kernels that provides SIMD operations that are commonly used in radios. And so Volk is part of the GNU Radio umbrella. So GNU Radio obviously makes use of Volk. And that's how we are able to run some fairly intensive GNU Radio flow graphs on a Raspberry Pi, relative to its computational capabilities. So
Excellent.
That was a very long way of saying, yes, we absolutely run on the Raspberry Pi, and we have some very specialized libraries to make that even better.
Okay, so before we get too involved, I had one question that I started. I was trying to figure out a way to bring us one in. I'm just going to come in with it. But how long has GNU Radio been in development for? I mean, when did it actually start?
Good question. 2001.
Okay.
Yeah. So
it's fairly mature then at that point. Then, I mean,
it is. Yeah. So GNU Radio. So the GNU Radio was originally founded by Eric Blossom, and the story. I don't know how much of the backstory you want here, but John Gilmore originally funded Eric Blossom for some code creation. This was back. I don't know if you remember what was happening with DRM in the early 2000s, but this was in the days of. This was when TiVo was new to the scene, or DVRs were new to the scene.
Right.
And so all the cable providers were lobbying Congress to create the don't copy bit. So this was going to be a bit that broadcast providers were going to stick in their transmissions, and they wanted Congress to make it illegal for you to record a television broadcast that had this bit set to 1.
Kind of like the old VHS or VCR Betamax debate way back when too.
Yeah.
With the home movies, it just comes full circle all over again, right?
Right. So Congress was considering this because they were being lobbied very heavily, and there were some people who thought this was ridiculous. And so it's sort of a demonstration of, okay, this security by making numbers illegal thing is not going to work for you. The idea for GNU Radio kind of got rolling with the idea that, okay, we could build something completely open source software with rudimentary radio hardware that just ignores that bit and effectively demonstrates the fallacy of this strategy. And that, this is not, Congress should not be lobbied for something like this. And that's actually, and it's the very first thing that GNU Radio did, the very first application that GNU Radio was developed for actually was ATSC, broadcast television. And so the first proof of concept that, hey, this project is going somewhere was decoding live broadcast television.
That's actually pretty neat. That's a great way to start. I mean, I had no idea that's, I got into GNU Radio just in research. I've actually never installed GNU Radio and put my hands on it or into the software itself, but I never knew it started all the way back then. I just thought it was just a platform that, to play around with and build framework for radio. So that's actually really neat.
Yeah, it has a long history at this point. It's old enough to vote.
Yeah, it depends where you are, right? It's all of the drink too.
Oh, true. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Excellent. So, so it runs on several operating systems, right? It runs pretty well on the Raspberry Pi, you were saying. I'm looking through here my notes as well too. So, let's back up a bit, right? Let's just say we've installed GNU Radio, right? We launch it. We're looking at a blank screen. I mean, who is this geared for? Is it geared for somebody who wants to build something that can listen to FM radio? I mean, obviously it could do a whole lot of stuff. So let's look at it this way. Is this a piece of software that somebody with no programming language, no programming skills can take a couple of these boxes and turn their, I guess, an SDR card, a software-defined radio USB stick, and get it into doing something that it can monitor the local, over the air FM radio or something like that pretty easily?
Yeah. So maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. So the goal is definitely what you just described. That is where we want to be in the place where someone can apt-get install GNU Radio. They fire up the GRC. That GRC is the graphical design tool that pretty much everyone thinks of when they think of GNU Radio.
Right. Basically, from there you just take blocks and connect the lines and physically
exactly.
make. Okay.
Exactly. And so the goal would be, you'll be able to open that up. You connect blocks together. You don't have to understand anything else about what's happening underneath the hood in terms of software design, and everything just works. And that, to be fair, realistically, that really does happen. It's not uncommon at this point. GNU has reached a point of maturity where that absolutely is possible. Depending on the level of complexity that you want to dive into, realistically, though, some software knowledge is going to be required. Certainly, you don't need to be like a kernel level C++ hacker, which a lot of the GNU Radio developers are, but that's also because they're developing the runtime. Like for sure, most GNU Radio users are not down in the trenches of software development like that. And really, what I would say is the knowledge required to be the area that requires the most knowledge to be successful with GNU Radio is within radio itself, or at least an interest in learning radio. So to give you some example, to perceive broadcast FM, that example you just gave. So if you would need to know, okay, I have a software radio device, I need to use a block that represents represents that device. I need to understand things like I'm going to set a sample rate, I'm going to set a gain, I'm going to set a center frequency. I'm going to take the output of that block and connect it to, an FMD mod block, and set a couple parameters in that block appropriately. I need to resample it for my audio card if my audio card has a different sample rate than the output of my DMOD. There's a couple things like that, right, where you kind of need to be aware of radio concepts. But especially for some of those early-ish applications, like we consider receiving broadcast FM to be the hello world of GNU Radio.
Right.
There are tons of guides and tutorials and examples and YouTube videos and that kind of thing. So realistically, you need to know a little bit about radio, or at least want to learn a little bit about radio to successfully design GNU Radio flow graphs. But depending on the level of complexity that you're operating at, I mean, there's tens of thousands of GNU Radio users right now doing things. So there's a large community that you can pull from.
Okay, so yeah, that was kind of a good thing you brought up that too. So basically, if the Hello World, right, was just listening to exactly Hello World, listening to the world basically over the air, and there's building blocks, but you have guides, and like you said, there's videos out there, so somebody can take just that basic simple module, and I assume that maybe you have these built already as a module, or you can just take this entire receiver and drop it in maybe as a
that's
kit.
right.
Okay.
Yep.
But then from there you can build upon it. So I guess you would be able to build in maybe a set of filters to kind of narrowband filters or something like that, or maybe you have a whole thing in that. I mean, I'm just thinking here. I mean, you have probably something that does P25 demodulation and puts that together, or DMR and XDN and all that stuff. So okay. And so basically, instead of taking software that's already available, this gives the user the ability to actually build their own and understand that if you take this module here and you tweak it, this is what happens to it.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. When we distribute example reference designs and example applications that are just flow graphs, right? You open it up and it's okay. I see these blocks and they're connected and they do a thing. And then you can modify them or edit them or add functionality, or, say, okay, I want to go from receiving a single, broadcast FM channel to receiving 10, and I want to demod all of them simultaneously and write them all to files and then go post-process. It's very easy to take very simple concepts in GNU Radio and then expand them into something much bigger.
Right. It's a lot safer. It's a lot safer to do this than to play around with a $6,000 radio and figure out you can't do anything with it. You turn the wrong pot too many times.
Absolutely. And I mean, the community is so big, right? I mean, and this is very common, if there's lots of people who use GNU Radio who don't even have radios, right?
Okay.
Because all you need is a recording from someone, the IQ or samples written to disk, and you can read those in GNU Radio and use it just like the radio device was there, right? Your flow graph knows no different.
Gotcha.
So yeah, there's plenty of that.
So let's go back then, because you said you have the graphical kit. Will this run command line and just run without the whole, like once you got everything squared away, can you save it as, I guess, something you can call up and just run it in the background without needing the whole visual?
Yeah, so the graphical tool actually just generates, what it's doing when you click run is it actually generates a Python file and then executes that Python file.
Gotcha. So that's how you're running it, I guess, then on the Raspberry Pi. Then you just have the Python file, and I mean, you would create this on a desktop and then save it over to the Pi and let the Pi just operate the Python file.
Yeah. And actually, this describing the flow graph is even just XML. Although, I should say, used to be XML. Now it's YAML. But anyways, it's just markup language. It describes, okay, I have these blocks and they're connected in this way. When you can then process that flow graph with GNU Radio. You don't need the graphical design tools to do any of this, by the way. It just makes it easier. You can take that YAML file and process it and generate a Python file. And that Python file is what is your actual GNU Radio application. And then you can run that. You can also run pure C++ flow graphs, and which is more, right, it generally uses less resources, is more optimized. But the Python itself, actually, you can make direct calls down into C++ to get that level of optimization and performance, which is on the Raspberry Pi generally what you're doing, because you really are trying to eke as much as possible out of an embedded system like that.
Mm-hmm. Pretty cool. So it sounds like, I mean, this is a very impressive toolkit that you guys have spent the last 18 plus years developing and working on, and have lots of volunteers contributing to. And I'm sure there's other pieces of software that are built upon GNU Radio that are pretty popular and used today. I mean, would that be a good assumption?
Oh yeah, absolutely. GNU
Perfect.
Radio is packaged within and part of many other, very large scale software radio projects. So one of my favorites is SatNogs. Are you familiar with SatNogs?
I watch them a lot on Twitter, and I would love to have them
Yeah.
on the podcast. So I haven't reached out to them yet, but I'm very intrigued by how SatNogs work, because I understand it's a whole like global network of volunteers who have radios that monitor satellites, and they all kind of pool their resources together to create almost like a blanket coverage of the satellites as they pass.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. I mean, you go to the SatNogs website, and it'll show you a map of the world, right, where all of these ground stations are, and you can click on a ground station and just start receiving satcom signals from that ground station, and everything is fully open source. So even the hardware design of those ground stations is open source designs. The software is GNU Radio open source flow graphs, right? It's an entirely open source satellite ground station that's accessible over the internet to anyone, and they have an entire network of these. I mean, it's like it represents a greater, satellite monitoring capabilities than most governments in the world have, right? It's incredible.
It is. I mean,
Yeah.
just watching what they have like on their Twitter stream. I guess was it at SatNogs, SatNogs, right?
Yep.
And if anybody who wants to check them out after the podcast, don't do it now. It's just just like what you're saying. It's unbelievable, like what they are posting and the information they're gathering, and it's you can. They pull their resources together. So somebody might be receiving something downstream, and they get 3 or 4 people to get the same information. They build these pictures and images, or they get the whole telemetry and all this other stuff. That it's pretty wild what they're pulling in. In fact, right, they even have their antennas, or it could be as simple as just a regular antenna, where they got the the pair of Yagis with the dual tilt on them, so they can pan up and down, left and right. So
Yeah, it's really neat.
it is.
It's really neat. But yeah,
I really
that's
want to
all.
get involved, but it's just time.
Yeah,
It's-
I know how that goes. But yeah, I mean that's GNU Radio under the hood.
Nice.
And there's several, there's a bunch of stuff like that. And
Do you have another example of maybe something else that? Is running
sure.
GNU?
Actually, something completely different. There's a group called Open Source Radio Telescope Project.
Okay.
And they are a group that's focused on STEM education. And what they do is they teach science and engineering and mathematics to middle and high school students through the lens of radio astronomy, because it actually is fairly simple to build a radio telescope for radio astronomy, and you can receive really, really cool measurements about different things in the cosmos. And so they have they work with these students. They build these radio telescopes. They connect them to low cost software radios, and have designed GNU Radio flow graphs, or help the students build GNU Radio flow graphs that sit behind them, and then take on these radio astronomy measurements that just a few decades ago would have been groundbreaking, and now we have middle and high schoolers doing this with open source software and hardware. So I love OSRTP. They do amazing stuff. And I'm really excited every time they come up in the community, or they come to GRCon and talk.
That's pretty neat. So let's talk about that. You reminded me about that. I actually went to your website today just to do a quick refresher on what GNU Radio was, and I saw the conference. So let's talk about the conference. What's that about, and when are you guys holding it?
So GRCon is our largest annual event. We have several. It's generally the third week of September. We're not locked to that. Like, that general time frame would be fine. Just so happens that the last few years in a row, it's always been the third week of September. So this will be our 9th year holding the conference. And we're at about 350-ish attendees per year. And it's a week-long event with 4 days of Monday through Thursday are tech talks and tutorials, new user workshops, that sort of thing. And then Friday is focused on, we call it the Dev Summit. We used to call it the Hackfest, actually, but we received feedback from some attendees that their employers raised an eyebrow at the name Hackfest. So now it is the Developer Summit. And then so Friday is focused on because GRCon's development community is so global. It represents pretty much the only time every year that we have the majority of the core development team in one place. So Friday is our opportunity to make use of that.
Gotcha. But this is pretty much open to anybody who wants to attend?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's open registration. Yeah, we welcome everybody. This year, now GRCon is 5-6 weeks away. It's in Huntsville, Alabama this year. Our theme is space and rocketry, which is why we're in Huntsville.
Gotcha.
But so I mean, the program is full now, and you can go and you can see the schedule of talks and keynotes and tutorials and workshops. Registration is open. Everyone's welcome to attend. There's student rates, especially if you are coming. Well, you can't. The talk schedule is full, but you can still submit posters. There's technical proceedings that are published every year. I mean, it's a pretty substantial technical conference, but we work really hard to make sure that there's content available for everyone from novices all the way up to diehard software radio experts who've been doing this for 30 years.
Nice. And like most conferences, though, you guys jump all over the United States then each year.
Yeah, we do. We move every year. There was a couple of years there, 2014 and 2015, where we stayed in DC, but that's the only time. Every year we've moved to a different city.
Nice. Kind of gives opportunity to people who can't travel too far to at least attend, which is really cool.
That's one of the goals, right? Every year you kind of pick up a different community, right? When we went to Colorado, like there's actually a fairly large community of people that use GNU Radio for cybersecurity and infosec research.
Okay.
And there's a lot of them in Colorado, and so we had a huge influx of cybersecurity folks. And when we were in San Diego, we got a huge influx of Navy and shipping, that sort of thing. And when we were DC, obviously, you get a lot of folks from the government side. Boston, there's a really interesting mix of sort of new tech startups and medical imaging and devices, which also use radio really heavily. So yeah, it's really interesting how depending on where you go, you sort of pull in a different demographic of the GNU Radio community.
That's pretty neat. So let's talk about what else you have up your sleeve. So you just really started a new podcast too.
I did, yeah. So it's called Signals and Bits, and I sort of been thinking about this for a long time, and I finally decided, okay, I'm just gonna give this a shot. I'm gonna go for it. And one of the things that I really most enjoyed about being part of GNU Radio is the breadth of people that I get to meet and work with and talk to. And we actually, in this discussion, you and I have talked about like a very wide variety of things, right? You think about like what the Satnogs community is doing, and compare that to what the Open Source Radio Telescope project is doing. They're both phenomenal, and they're both amazing and interesting, but in very different ways, and they're doing different things. And the common thread, right, is open source software radio. And so I feel very privileged to been able to work with all these people and talk to them and learn about what they're doing, and have GNU Radio and other things that I've worked on be part of that. And I decided I want to find a way for everyone else to hear about these things, to meet these people, to hear about the work they're doing, to kind of provide a platform for that sharing of ideas and collaboration. And so that's what Signals and Bits is. It's similar to this podcast. It's my interview podcast, right? So each episode is me interviewing someone from the software radio community, and that is the common thread, that whatever they're doing is somehow related to or using or developing software radio. And I'm only a few episodes in, but it's been a lot of fun, and I've been really excited to see the response.
Yep, podcasting is pretty addictive. So it also makes you want to pull your hair out to it sometimes, I'll tell you that. But yeah,
I was very surprised at how substantial the effort is to edit a single episode. That one.
It gets easier, but you also find out too. There's people out there that are more than willing to help you.
Oh yeah,
when it comes to it.
I found those services.
Yeah. a lot of my listeners will write to me and say that they've listened to me on the train on the way to work. I mean, I've gotten letters from, Australia, which is completely, you would bore a hole from where I live and go straight through, and you'd pop out somewhere over there. But it's pretty cool to think that, this guy's commuting to work the same way I commute to work. And while I'm listening to some other podcasts, this guy's listening to me. So it's really neat that it's a great way to introduce people to what it is you're interested in, as well as to educate and share the knowledge too, which is really what my goal is just to share how radio and scanners work. And I believe it's the same thing you do on your podcast, is how the things that go into GNU Radio and you're more of the technical side. And the last episode I listened to you was first one I listened to you was one with Harold on Corrosive. He was a guest of mine. And then the next one you had on was, I guess he was silicone conductor.
He's executive at Xilinx, the FPGA.
He's at Xilinx, right. I mean, that one went over my head. But
that one was deeply technical.
Yes. It was still good listening, though. It was still very interesting the way it was put together and how it goes in there. But it's very impressive to how this hobby can go from being very simple to being very complex in the blink of an eye. So
yeah, and I'm still experimenting too with it. I don't know if you listened to the third one, which is my third guest is the head librarian at the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics.
Okay.
And so if you listen to her interview and then compare it to the last two, all three of them are I'm sort of like experimenting with interview style and how often do I interrupt people? When do I jump in? When do I deviate? Like when do I try to divert them from the path they're on? There's so much complexity to being a good interviewer, and I am for sure not one yet. But I'm really trying to figure out like how do I do this well? What makes a good interviewer? What makes a good interviewer? What's interesting is that since having started the podcast, now listening to NPR and that sort of thing, I'm way more tuned in to the method and approach of the journalist or the interviewer in NPR. It's like, oh, that was good, or I'm not sure I would have interrupted there.
I know it's a lot to learn, and I'm going on, almost 2 years. Right? I'm at this, almost 2 years now with this, and it's like I feel like I'm still just getting started. And you go back to the early episodes, and you cringe listening to that, and it's like, should I pull those down and start over again or not? But you keep them up, and you'll learn. I mean, it's you just go with it, and it's like anything else. The more you do it, the better you get. I mean, look at what we're doing here with the radio stuff. When we first started, it was brand new territory, and you can't compare yourself to the guy who's 1,000 podcasts in.
But it's fun either way. So
it certainly is.
Yeah.
But this was definitely great having you on here. Do you have anything else that you want to bring up before we split?
No, I don't think so. You actually hit the two things I wanted to plug was GRCon next month in Huntsville, Alabama. So registration's still open, and my own podcast, signalsandbits.com. But we went through both of those, so I'm all set.
Excellent. Yeah, I definitely forgot about the convention, so I'm glad you brought that one up. But I definitely wanted to make sure I hit you on the podcast as well. So where can people find you that want to learn more about GNU Radio and your podcast, and also the convention? You have websites or Twitter, or how do we find out more?
All of the above. So the primary homepage for GNU Radio is gnuradio.org. So gnuradio.org. And then from there, it's pretty easy to find the GRCon website. I think there's a huge banner at the top of the page.
Right front and center.
Yeah, and then Signals and Bits is signalsandbits.com. And the website is small, minimal, easy to navigate. Should be relatively short, and it's also distributed on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and Spotify and a few others.
All the main players.
Right.
Yep. And also, too, you can get to the podcast, too, if you can't find signalsandbits.com. You can just go to GNUradio.org, right? And then there's a podcast link at the top, too, right?
Oh, is there? Somebody might have added that. I didn't
know
that.
That's how I found it today. So,
oh, my gosh.
I was looking for it. I'm like, oh, that's podcast. So, but it's up there. It's on the right-hand side, at least when it was when I looked at it. So.
Oh, wow.
Yep. All right. And then as far as you have anything that you put up on Twitter or any other social media that they can grab you?
Yeah, absolutely. So GNU Radio has a Twitter account. It's managed by a few people. I manage it in the U.S., and then we have somebody in the EU and someone in the UK that you kind of do the handoff during the day. Um, and so that the GNU Radio Twitter account, which is just at GNU Radio, is very active. And we have a lot of fun with that one. That's, a mix of, we share news and interesting comments and cool things from the community, but, we also have fun with it. And then Signals and Bits is at Signals and Bits on Twitter.
Okay. In the whole word, right? Signals and Bits.
That's right. Yep.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah, I know I'm following GNU Radio. I'll make sure I follow Signals and Bits as well. So, but Ben, it was definitely a pleasure having you on the podcast, and I look forward to maybe having you back again in the future if there's anything else that you're working on, or maybe we'll have you come in next year and really quickly plug an update to the convention when you guys roll around next September.
That sounds great. Thanks so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Sounds good. Thanks again. So I want to thank Ben one more time for being a guest on our podcast. I hope you guys all enjoyed the interview. And if you have any suggestions for future interviews, if you'd like to be on the podcast, if there's something you are working on that you'd like to share with the community, or anything else, you can be a guest. Just go onto scannerschool.com, click on podcast. That's going to bring you to a drop-down menu where you can click on become a guest. When you click on there, it's going to bring up a calendar. You can click the date and the time that works the best for both of us, and I'll confirm that, and we'll have you on as a podcast guest. It's a very simple and easy process, and the interview goes really quick, to be honest with you. So, again, if you have any suggestions for the show, you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, I would love to have you on here. And I'd also like to thank our current Patreon supporters, because you guys help keep Scanner School funded. So I want to thank our current Patreon supporters: Stephen Sheffield, Scott Vorder, Signals Everywhere, Craig Harper, Ken Newberry, Kenneth Fowler, William Arcan, Dan, Glenn Bryden, Anthony Saggio, Raymond Hill, James Felling, MT Bono, and Mark Beebe. So I'd like to thank you all again for your support. And again, if you don't want to help support us via Patreon, we have other ways you can help support us. We can do a one-time PayPal donation, as well as our affiliate link. So if you want to buy from ScannerMaster or Amazon, or even look for software from Butel, you go to scannerschool.com/support, and that's a great way to find out how to help support us when it doesn't even cost you anything to do so. If you're going to make that purchase anyway, there you go. Now, next week we have a consulting call with Lou. Lou was the winner of our Ask Scanner School little consulting contest I hold once a month. And all you have to do to win is to ask me a question. Now, right now, nobody's asked a question for the upcoming Ask Scanner School session. So if you go to scannerschool.com/ask and you ask me a voice question, you might be in a very easy running for a free consulting call. So again, scannerschool.com/ask. You can email me, but you're not going to be in the running for the consulting call if you email me. I'm trying to promote more people to use our voice methods, which are SpeakPipe or our local number. So again, scannerschool.com/ask if you have a question for me related to scanner radios, and we'll let you know more too about the live sessions that are coming. With that, I will catch you all next Tuesday. I want to say thanks again for listening. Thanks again, Ben, so much for being a guest on this podcast. And everybody go check out his podcast at Signals and Bits, at signalsandbits.com. And also, don't forget, I know it's really short notice, but again, and Ben has his GNU Radio Conference coming up in just a couple of weeks. It's actually less than a month from when this podcast airs. So again, if you want your tickets, if you're going to be in the Huntsville, Alabama area, and you would like to learn more about it, you can go to GNUradio.org. That's GNURadio.org. And you can learn more and grab your tickets for GNU Radio Conference 2019. They actually call it the GRCon. GRCon is being held Huntsville, Alabama, and you can get your tickets online, GNUradio.org. Again, it's less than a month away. I am Phil Lichtenberger, and this is Scanner School. We teach you everything you need to know about the scanner radio hobby. This podcast is copyright 2019, Monitor Long Island Inc. We will catch you all again next Tuesday, 73.